And welcome to another edition of Political Power Ranker. I am Chris Berg, Political Director for the Nexstar Media Group's affiliates across the country. And joining me now again with our numbers, our guru, our man of the hour, Spencer Kimball, Emerson College Polling up in Boston. Good afternoon, morning, wherever you are and watching this. Hi, Spencer.
Hi, Chris. I hope you're doing well. And today we get to look at the Garden State and we'll pull it together.
The Garden State, you pulled all the weeds, you got everything out of the way, you're creating clarity for us. So the Garden's looking really interesting today. Tell us about your latest poll, Spencer.
So we've got a big race here for the governor's race. As you can see here, Jack and Mikie are pretty well-known candidates out there. And so this is our first general election poll. If you remember in the primaries, Jack kind of ran away with the Republican nomination with over 50%. Mikie had a little bit more of a struggle in that primary. She won with about a third of the vote. So the Democrats are still trying to get in alignment with her. And as we take a look at those poll results, we see a very close race, 43-43 between the top two candidates. I think one main thing to take out, Chris, as we look at those numbers, the top line, look at your very likely voter versus your somewhat likely voter. You remember when we looked at Mamdani or we looked out in California, there was more energy for Prop 50 or for Mamdani, and you could see that in the very likely voter. Here we see Jack with a little bit more energy in the very likely and Mikie doing better with the somewhat likely voter. And that might be a result of that divisive primary that she was part of.
Now, let's be clear here. This is from a public-facing polling standpoint, this is new. This is something we haven't seen, a virtual tie in a race that seemed to be leaning Democrats up until this point.
Certainly. I mean, if you looked at the public polls going into this, some had it as high as 23 points at one point. Most of them have them around 9 or 10. When we looked at that data, we did not see that. We saw a very competitive race, one that the Republican could certainly win, and it wouldn't be a surprise on election night if he pulled it out. Because you got to remember, New Jersey isn't where it was back in 2017. In 17, when Murphy wins, he's able to run against the Chris Christie administration and his lieutenant governor. And if you remember at that time, Christie wasn't very popular in New Jersey. His approval rating at the time was around 19%. So that's where Murphy comes in. And in 2021, he runs against Jack in a much more competitive race, and that's a 3-point race. And now we're seeing Jack running pretty strong here in 25, and we'll see if Sherrill is able to outmuscle him at the end here to win over those undecided voters. But it's definitely very competitive and a lot different than what we were expecting based on the other polling we were seeing.
What you're painting here is a much more purple New Jersey than I think most people anticipated seeing.
Well, I mean, if you look at the presidential race, Trump loses by 6 points in a state where Biden wins by, about 15. Same thing in 2016, Clinton wins by 15. So there's certainly some movement moving to the right in the state. But I think a lot of it has to do with Phil Murphy, the current governor. His administration seems to be underwater. His favorabilities is a -9. And so Sherrill has a little bit of a problem here trying to create some, sunlight between her and the current administration while not really pounding on the Democratic Party because she represents that as well.
Well, we got a lot more numbers to look at, but before we do that, I want to bring in WPIX political reporter Henry Rossoff, who has been covering this race, intimately involved in it. Henry and I are going to be together in New Jersey next week as WPIX has a couple of big events, a lieutenant governor's debate, and then we have a governor's forum, all done live at Keene University. So be on the lookout for that. But Henry, you were seeing these numbers this morning. You were reporting on these numbers this morning for picks. Tell us what you're thinking, what you're seeing on the ground right now. Is it reflective of what Spencer's showing this morning in his poll?
Very much so. I mean, New Jersey really has been developing this purple streak. You'll remember one of the recent races that Spencer didn't necessarily mention was Ciattarelli nearly beating Governor Murphy 4 years ago by just 3 points. And then in national elections, again, New Jersey normally goes double digits for the Democrats, and Spencer nicely recapped the history on how it's got a lot tighter last time around. What I would say, though, as someone who actually grew up in New Jersey, there really is this purple streak. People don't look at it from a national perspective and realize that it exists, but we had 8 years of Chris Christie. I know he was very unpopular at the end, but he won re-election. And so it's not unprecedented in New Jersey Jersey's history, but it certainly is a modern shift, at least over the last 10 years or so, and very much so is a reflection on increasing unpopularity of the Murphy administration, which has effectively been a lame duck. The governor's also taken quite a bit of flack for leaving the state so much on vacations and being busy with other national policy. People haven't liked that as their grocery prices increase, as their utility bills increased, as their property taxes increased. It's rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and Mr. Ciattarelli's taking advantage of that.
Interesting stuff. Now, Spencer, you've got another slide here that kind of breaks down this race a little in more demographic terms. And these somewhat likely voters that Mikie Sherrill needs seem to be appearing in one group.
Yeah, they tend to be younger and female, and that's a problem for her because that's part of her base. Now, this might be a result of that primary and that she still has to bring these people together. But what's interesting in this graph is you can see that youth vote is back with the Democrats. And I always referred to this as the Obama coalition, where he had a really strong youth vote and then was able to pull it off with postgraduates. What the concern here is if you look at our polls from 21 and 25, you can see that the older vote is shifting more Republican. That plus 70 was shifting more blue back in 21 when Murphy was able to win by 3 points. Now that is shifting more red. Now, Sherrill has been able to pick up more of that younger vote, but we're going to see if she can get that out to the polls. As you mentioned, that's the somewhat likely voter who are breaking in her direction, but they're somewhat likely, and we'll see if they come out on election day. But the next one on gender, that's another one where, again, we can compare. So back in 21, we were off by maybe 2 points. Same thing in 17, but both polls were off to the Democrats' advantage. So if you look at this race, you might consider this could be off a little bit for Jack's advantage. But look at the men. It's about the same as what we saw in 21. Jack had about a 10-point lead. But it's the female vote that Sherrill is not really, Murphy was winning it by 20 points last time. She's only winning it by 10 points. And you can see the 15% that are undecided there. So she's got to move over that female vote the way Murphy was able to. And Jack's going to try to make some inroads with those voters as well.
Henry, thoughts on these two slides?
Well, what I'll add is 4 years ago, we were really fresh on the heels of the Dobbs decision. And so abortion was far more of an important issue. That was certainly a motivating factor, if you'll remember back to that New Jersey election and what rights and things Democrats could do to ensure themselves against what they consider to be, a conservative court that they don't agree with, still don't agree with. So it's less of an issue, less of a motivating factor. And then you talk about trying to get those somewhat likely young voters to turn out. Sherrill's walking a fine line with locally and nationally the person who's emerging as sort of this youth Democratic leader, which is Zohran Mamdani. She's getting a lot of pressure from the center left not to really throw in with him ideologically. I don't think she's very similar to him, but also that young voter that, very motivated, very inspired by what they're seeing across the river in New York City. And she is waffling on her support for him. In fact, it's one of the things that Ciattarelli is consistently calling her out for right now. After initially saying, yeah, I guess sure, I'll support the Democratic nominee in New York, she then turned around and said, I'm going to stay out of New York politics. So she's been back and forth on this, and she's walking a tightrope and may not be walking it quite successfully enough to turn out the votes that she needs.
So to be clear, she has not full-throatedly endorsed Zohran Mamdani in New York, correct?
Yes, that's correct. She said initially, really off the cuff, she was asked in the day after the New York City primary, will you support the Democratic winner? And she said, well, if he's a Democrat, sure, without really knowing very much about him, or that it was a Democratic socialist that maybe believed some different things that she did, and then upon reflection and pressure by moderate Democrats and certainly Republicans that might be inclined to consider her, said, well, I'm just going to stay out of it.
Mm-hmm. Spencer, what are you thinking here from a tactical standpoint that she needs to do to get those youth out to vote for her?
Well, I think Henry really raised a tough issue for her because the Mamdani vote is going to bring out the youth vote, but it could cost her with older voters. And that's what you're seeing in New York. And different groups are going to, gravitate towards her on that, but they're also going to detract. Right now, she seems to be riding the line pretty well in holding that youth vote, making some inroads, but she's right in this race. The question is, would the bottom fall out if she lost that youth vote? But if she lost the youth vote, could she pick up the older voters in that situation? She's doing well with the post grads, not with the college grads, so we can start to see some of those differences. But I think the big issue for the Democrats compared to 21 are the issues themselves. Back in 21, as Henry alluded to, we're talking about COVID and vaccines. We were talking about Hurricane Ida, I think, or storm. So there was different issues on the table than what we're dealing with in this election, where they seem to be more pocketbook issues that we'll talk about later today. And we'll see if the Democrats are able, as you mentioned, the abortion issue. Those are strong Democratic issues. We're going to see if they can get back to that, because right now we're seeing the economy as the top issue in the state.
And one last observation on the men-women breakdown. It looks eerily similar to a Trump breakdown of men and women. Am I spot on there, or am I off?
No, you're right. That's exactly the problem that Harris was having. She was winning the female vote, but not by the margins that Biden won the female vote. And, you think about it, she's the actual female. So those things happen. And Sherrill's in the same position. She's not winning the female vote by that margin that Murphy won it by. Now, it may come back to her, but that's certainly a point of concern for the campaign if you're working on that side.
With about 6 weeks left to go before Election Day, they've got some work to do, it looks like. Let's move on to that next slide, and it's an interesting breakdown and more reflective of what we're talking about here just now in reference to Donald Trump and Phil Murphy and how they are being seen by New Jersey voters. Talk to us about that, Spencer.
So look at Donald Trump. He's down by 10 points, and that's underwater. But, in 2017, he was down 21 points. He was really underwater. So in New Jersey, his popularity has increased. If we look at Phil Murphy, back in 17, he was at 36-30. And in 2021, he was 49-47. Now he's underwater, 35-44. So this is where Sherrill has to deal with this current administration's negative disapproval and be able to, move away from that while still being able to pick up votes, saying that she's going to do something different than the current administration without bashing the current administration. It's a really difficult place for her to be, and we'll see what strategy and messaging she's able to come up with over the next 6 weeks to hold on to that vote or switch them over.
Henry, the first debate in this race was just a few days ago, and what was noticeable is that Mikie Sherrill was trying to connect Donald Trump with her opponent throughout that 2-hour event. I'm not sure that is a winning strategy at this point for her to get more people out. What do you think? What do you think, and what are you seeing?
Well, both candidates, for that matter, seem content to turn this into a proxy battle, with Ciattarelli tying Sherrill as much as, for the number Spencer just showed, as much as Sherrill is trying to tie Ciattarelli to Trump. Because, Ciattarelli makes the arguments like, stop talking about Trump. That doesn't affect your utility bill, your property taxes, your other local pocketbook issues. And Sherrill making the argument, well, you won't stand up to Trump when he cuts our health care and cuts our food programs and, conducts immigrant raids. So they both seem content to make it about this proxy battle, but those numbers are decidedly mixed about what that will actually mean to your voter, and therefore it's not particularly surprising to see the polling, the top line polling in this, be neck and neck, because each is trying to tie the other to a figure that is underwater, and neither presenting as much of an affirmative vision as perhaps New Jerseyans are looking to see. And I would say that maybe that is the shift we see in the closing weeks is, maybe Ciattarelli stops talking so much about Murphy and talks more about what he's going to do. And for the same thing for Sherrill, stops talking about so much about Trump and what she's going to do.
Fascinating first block, gentlemen. We've hopefully people enjoyed it, because this is some breaking news, some very interesting content. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back with some more breakdown of this poll, and including something you're going to want to see on what's important and what New Jersey voters are looking at from these candidates. We'll be right back with Political Power Ranker. Welcome back to Political Power Ranker. We're talking New Jersey politics, brand new poll from Emerson College. Spencer released it just a few hours ago. We are excited to talk more about it. Let's move on now to a breakdown of the numbers in reference to what should the next governor do, really, work with or not work with the Trump administration. Spencer, Did these numbers surprise you as they evolve?
Well, they've been pretty consistent. I know it was 53-47 back in May, and now it's 51-49 in the other direction. But generally, it's a 50-50. It's not the type of issue, if I'm Sherrill, that you're going to necessarily win the election on. The dislike of Trump and the unpopularity of Trump hasn't grown over the last 8 years in Jersey. I would say it's gone in the other direction. So to make this the referendum on Trump, as you can see, it's 50-50. And when we look at the race, it's also about, 50-50. So it will be interesting to see if she comes up with another issue, or, if another issue emerges, just through natural events that happen, day-to-day activities. But at this point, connecting it with Trump doesn't seem to be a home run that it was maybe 4 years ago.
Henry, are you seeing the same thing on the ground?
Yeah, particularly striking. I think, and I feel like a lot of the country feels this way, frankly, not just in New Jersey. It's whether you like the president or not. I think people are really tired of the bickering. So president's underwater in New Jersey at 41%, but you still have 49% say you want to work with him. So there's a delta there of people who say, even though I don't like the president, I want some results, and I'm just tired of the bickering.
Understood. All right, let's move on to another set of numbers here, and it's on taxes. And what should we do with the property tax rate in Jersey, and who's responsible? So, Spencer, what say
So
you?
we got a chance here in Jersey to ask a couple of local questions, because it's a state race. So who are they blaming on or responsible for property taxes? You can see a plurality is saying everybody's responsible. But when you really dig into it, the governor takes a little bit more of the heat than everybody else. And who's the governor is the Democrat. So he's carrying the bag. Not a huge issue for the Republicans to use, but it is pretty strong as far as who people are blaming for high property taxes.
It was interesting in the debate, Henry. Both candidates were asked if they were going to cut taxes, and Jack Ciattarelli, the Republican, came out full-throated and said basically yes. Mikie Sherrill was a little more nuanced in her answer. She wants to review the documents. Not that she's not supportive of it, but she doesn't know where everything stands at this moment, and we'll look at it and make the best decision for New Jersey residents. Knowing these numbers exist and knowing what you live, what do you think about that approach, and what people are thinking out there in the Garden State?
Let me take my glasses off when I say this. The state government in New Jersey has very little, if anything, to do with property taxes. It's about your schools and it's about your towns. And I learned that, from the time I was very young and watched my parents yelling at their property tax bill when it arrived, because it was quite high then and it's even higher now. And so Ciattarelli promising to cut and cap property taxes sitting in the governor's seat is not necessarily the most genuine promise that he's making. Sherrill, on the other hand, saying she'll do what she can, and Murphy kind of did the same thing with rebates and incentives of towns to lower these things, is more realistic. Now, is that charismatic to people who are suffering an affordability crisis? No, not necessarily. But a stone cold promise from Ciattarelli to cut and cap property taxes is a promise that most people understand this issue, realize is going to be very difficult, if not impossible to keep. So this is one of those issues where people never want to take money from their own towns and their own schools, and it's much easier to blame the governor or the state legislature. But the fact of the matter is, it's your school district, it's your town, it's those other elections that are on the ballot this coming November.
Henry, I'm looking and thinking of you as a 5-year-old reading the tax code of New Jersey. I can't imagine you were doing quite that then, but that's my imagery when you referred to it that way. But it is a big issue. And Spencer, is there movement a candidate can make on this issue that will be beneficial to them? What can they do or say?
They can say what Jack said: I'm going to cut your taxes. Generally in Jersey, people think taxes are high. We've studied the state for 9 years. And when we've asked the question about taxes, they say they're too high. Now, generally, that's what's said in a lot of different states. But we have that issue here. Jack said, I'm going to solve that problem for you. And he might not be able to, but voters want to hear that. And they may not want to hear what Mikie's saying, where, yeah, maybe we can cut taxes, but I got to actually look at the books first. That's a more cautious approach, which some voters might say that's more realistic. And I'm going to go with that approach. But I think just saying I'm going to cut taxes generally gets people's attention, and they like that mantra. We'll see if he can actually do it if he was to win. But, as far as the campaign trail, those are the type of promises you hear from the candidates.
And as Henry, has Jack Ciattarelli explained in any detail of how he would make that happen as a governor when he knows that it's really out of his hands to a large degree?
He talks about deep incentives to school districts to merge their bureaucracy. That is one of the big challenges we have in the Garden State. There are many, many, many school districts in many redundant sort of areas. And so the worst kept secret in the state. Everyone knows that, school superintendents, there's too many of them. Arguably, they're overpaid. Arguably, there should be more consolidation, and said he wouldn't mandate, but would incentivize that. He's also talked about funding schools at the state level to take that burden off of it, but then he's also talked about cutting the state budget. So you're kind of talking in circles around different sorts of ideas here, but generally that's what would have to happen. You'd need school consolidation. You'd need the state to pump money into the schools so they're not, they don't come out behind when they end up losing funding if they are able to cut taxes. Will he be able to pull that off? Governors haven't been able to do that since forever. So, but that's the blueprint. Everyone knows what the blueprint is.
And it gets real personal when you start talking about people's schools and their neighborhoods and local control and ceding it to a nearby town. That's a hard thing to get people to do.
It absolutely is. I mean, and that's why you end up with so much local control. Where the consensus around there being some room for consolidation. And by the way, in Spencer's polling, there was a plurality, I believe, that did support consolidation. But to your point, Chris, parents of young children or children who were school age were more hesitant. So that gets into, and those are motivated voters. Those are people who are active in the community oftentimes. So difficult to do. But everyone seems to understand that some consolidation is necessary. It's just not my neighborhood. Right? Not in my neighbor's neighborhood, maybe on the other side of the state. Well, there are people who live there too. So can you pull this off? We'll see.
It's an interesting point there with parents. In the polling, we asked, we got the people are parents of 3 to 18-year-olds, and they break for Sherrill by 7 points. So that group of voters is more in line with the Democrat. They see the education front perhaps, and they are more in line with Sherrill. Those without children, 3 to 18, they're breaking for Jack by a couple of points as well.
Maybe that's a point that's beneficial to Sherrill to make on the campaign trail. Jack's taking away your schools.
And that would be a strong Democratic issue to run on. When we look at those top issues, the economy is by far the top issue in Jersey, but education's there at 10%. And that could be something that, again, we're only talking about 10% of voters left who are undecided. How do you switch over? Now, last time, Jack picked up those undecided voters in our polling. So there was a late break for Jack. We had about 8%, and they broke 60-40 for him, moved our poll from 6 down to 4. So we'll see if Jack has that same type of late push where he's able to, pick up those last 2-3 points, or if Sherrill has a plan to pick up that younger female vote that seems to be on the sideline.
And I'll add quickly that education in these off-year elections can be a breakthrough issue, even though it's not the top line issue in the polling. I'll cite Glenn Youngkin's win in Virginia just 4 years ago, where that was absolutely a breakthrough issue, even though everyone you asked said it was COVID and economy and crime. But education became that dark horse issue that really tipped the scales for him.
We only have a few moments left in this segment, but I want to get to one last slide, which is who's responsible for the higher utility rates in New Jersey, another pocketbook issue that is very important to New Jersey voters. Spencer, tell us a little bit about this quickly.
Well, we can see there's less of all of these people, 35%, and the last one, the plurality was like 45%. But here, the Democrats are blaming the utility companies. You can see it's 30% here, but the Democrats are up around 35%, and the Republicans are blaming the governor. Here it's at 22%, but the Republicans are up around 35% when we look at their crosstabs. So we can see on the issue of utility, it seems that the governor is holding the bag a little bit more than on the property taxes, but you do have the utility companies that seem to be, the bad guy in the room right now for voters.
Henry, a couple words that come to mind when you see your utility bill.
Frustrating because it continues to go up. I'll quickly outline the candidate's position on each of these. Sherrill has said she'll declare a state of emergency to sort of harness executive power to try and build capacity in New Jersey. And Ciattarelli said he'd do an all of the above approach, pulling New Jersey out of some environmental coalitions to more quickly build. But he is opposed to one major source that's already in the pipeline for New Jersey, which is offshore wind, another sort of major issue, particularly in South Jersey in this election.
Thank you, Henry. We got to take a quick break. You're watching Political Power Ranker as we break down New Jersey polling numbers. Coming back, we will have who's up and who's down. I know it's my favorite part of the week. Hopefully it's yours. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Political Power Ranker. It is now time for who's up and who's down. Spencer, who's up?
Well, this week, Chris, it's not who, but what's up, and it's pocketbook issues. It's the economy in New Jersey, affordable housing in New Jersey. Now, we just talked about electric bills. That's where it seems that the voters are, and we'll see what the candidates' messages are in the next 6 weeks to alleviate those concerns for them.
And who's down in this week's poll?
Yeah, after 8 years of governor, it looks that Phil Murphy is down right now. His approval rating is about as low as we've seen, and his disapproval is about as high as we've seen. So the governor is not leaving on a high note, it seems, at this point, and we'll see if he's able to clean up his reputation as he leaves office.
Let's go over to Henry. Henry, we've got about a minute or so for you to kind of reflect on what Spencer just said and the numbers you saw today.
President Trump is already out with a post on Truth Social commenting on the fine work that Spencer did over at Emerson College, and we've been breaking down just now. He praised Ciattarelli, who he's endorsed after Ciattarelli has a mixed history of supporting the president, but has come around in recent years. But he praised his stance on crime and taxes. This poll did not really show that crime was a particularly motivating factor. Most people say it's about the same in their personal lives as it was a year ago. But certainly taxes is an important issue, and we'll see how this all reflects upon President Trump himself when the results come in.
Terrific. Spencer, any closing thoughts?
Looking forward to next week's poll of Virginia.
We are doing Virginia next week. That race itself, it seems to be closing down there, and I'm excited to see what kind of numbers you come up with for next week so we can kick that one around and see if we've got another barn burner, just like New Jersey appears to be moving toward. So that's it for this week for Political Power Ranker. Henry, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to see you next week out in New Jersey, in the Newark area at Keene College, as we have a lieutenant governor's debate and a forum for our governor's candidates, both live, and it's going to make a lot of news, I think, between you and your counterpart, Dan Manarino. So excited to see you there, and hopefully see you guys watching those debates. You can find them on pix11.com next week. So look for them. And don't forget, watch Pix on Politics with Dan Manarino, pix.com, every week. Dan has great guests every Sunday. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next week.